Adjacent night. He did not bring much with him to this city, just the carry-on with the good wheels, a toiletry bag that always seemed heavy for its size, and the little stack of papers he carried out of habit, though he would only ever open the top page. The hallway carpet had the pattern of waves that always looked like waves, even when you tried to make it look like anything else. He held his keycard to the reader, and the light nodded, a small green reassurance he took on faith. The door yielded with the same shove as last time and swung in on the place the company had given him to sleep. The room gave him beige and a chair that looked meaner than it felt, and a window onto the white side of the neighboring building where pipes ran, street and quiet. A city guide lay on the desk with the pages still clamped shut like teeth. The cover told him about neighborhoods he would not visit. The air smelled like the detergent a hotel uses when it wants you to believe in newness. He took one step in and knew, before he could form the thought, that the place had been occupied since he last stood here. The air held the spent sweetness of a shower. The secret drawer at the desk, where the room service menu hid, stood open to the late menu that sells the idea of good decisions made too near midnight. Everything he meant to do later had been done without him. His suitcase stood empty on the rack, its shell shiny and final in the lamplight, the wheels crossed into an X. His shirts hung in the closet by the window in the lazy order. His hands always found at home solids. First, then checks the shirt he wore when he wanted to look like a man going to a nicer dinner last. One cuff was rolled wrong, as if his hands had argued with each other on the way to the bar. The toiletry bag lay unzipped on the dresser light because it had been gutted, and the toothbrush that was his and no one else stood wet in a glass that did not exist until the hotel made mornings necessary. A single sock waited on the chair, heel turned out, accusing and friendly both. The bed was made, but not untouched. The cover held a long valley where a body had settled and then lifted like bread fallen in the pan. The pillows wore two shadows, one deep and one more careful. On the knitstand, the menu lay open to sweet and salt, and under it a receipt in his hand testified to a meal he had not imagined ordering. The signature looked like the one he learned to make in his father's kitchen, practiced on old envelopes, compact and embarrassed, not the swagger you saw in strangers. The timestamp printed by the hotel system told him a time that had not arrived, a small, neat proclamation from a machine that did not care about what morning meant. He did not want to think about how a device could be so certain. He backed out into the hall and looked at the silver plate on the door. The number told him what it had told him each time he came back from a day spent speaking politely. He rode down without thinking, let the elevator ring its soft note at the lobby that felt like a throat. Clearing then, walked back up by a different staircase, as if angle could trick the building into admitting a mistake. His card opened his door again, and the room he stepped into was the room he recognized from that afternoon. Suitcase zipped and bulging, laundry pressed into tight corners, the city guide closed, the chair still tucked too close to the desk. Between the two rooms, there was a wall. In that wall, a vent, a neat grill high on the shared line. The slot set into the metal told him airflow moved one way from his place into the other. When he put his ear to it, he heard a shower in the other room, steady hiss, then a short cough. He knew the way you know your step in your own stairwell. Someone over there turned off the water. In both rooms, he could imagine, mirrors fogged up. In his room, in this moment, the mirror did not fog. He stood and looked at his face in old glass and found himself and did not trust the lines around his mouth. He set his suitcase on the bed in the honest room and unzipped it with a sound that always made him feel like a man with choices. He spread shirts in the order he wanted, laid out socks and underwear, and the belt he pretended not to need, made the room his in the cheap ways lodging allows. He stood with his hands on his hips, an act he had learned from his father, and tried to measure what mattered. He picked up the room service menu and closed it, slid it back into the drawer, and shut the drawer and waited to hear if the room would put it back. It did not. He left his toiletry bag zipped, set the toothbrush back inside, dried, and placed the bag upright on the dresser, with its zipper toward the wall like a safe. He let his name lie quiet in his head to see if it would answer. The front desk would not be useful to him. He knew this from all the times he had trusted counters to know the shape of a man's worry. A counter listened until the listening turned into a problem with a rule attached, and then it pushed you toward a lift or a lock. He put one finger under the receipt that did not belong to his day and slid it to the edge of the knitstand and tipped it, as if a thing could be thrown away without getting into the blood. He waited for a knock that did not come. The air conditioning sighed as if it had been made to imitate a living thing. He went down anyway. The lobby gave him its daytime eyes. A man behind the counter in a jacket too warm for the season. A woman answering a phone with a voice that made check-in sound tender. He waited until the man looked up. When he said the number of his room out loud, the number sounded like anything else, a code a decent person would accept. He explained something about a mix-up, about a second room that had his hand inside it. That was the phrase his brain offered, and he did not say it aloud. He said instead, "The room is in use." The man said the hotel was full tonight, and that maintenance could check the lock, that the system showed no duplicate keys cut for his room, that perhaps housekeeping had staged the space for the next guest and misread a note. He did not want to ask about the receipt with his name and the time printed in a future he had not reached. He asked anyway, because dignity leaves a man when proof arrives. They could print him a copy if he liked, said the woman, and the printer made its careful small complaints. And a sheet the size of all sheets emerged with his name and his pen, and the total of items he now had to own. The first line was a sandwich he never picked. The second a cup of coffee that would have pleased him if he had been allowed to drink it at that hour. The third a soft little thing, a dessert he would never ask for in public, because he felt too old for wanting sweetness alone. They looked at the paper together, as if it were evidence in a trial. The man behind the counter said the time stamped was the time the ticket closed, not the time it had been signed. He said it with a seriousness that tried to be a rope. He offered to remove the charge as courtesy. He folded the paper and slid it across to him with 2 fingers, and said to have a restful night, as if the night would be convinced by the instruction. Back on his floor, the hallway gave him the same long country smell that all halls have, carpet and machine air. Old smoke scrub it away, a lemon cleaner that had seen many mornings. He paused at the other door, the one that had mirrored his own room in the way a face mirrors a thought. He put his ear to the wood and heard nothing but the building making its dark bargains with itself. He did not try the handle. He could not conduct his life at that level and still believe he was a person who belonged in public. He entered his own room and let the door ease itself shut. He hung the do not disturb as if a sign had power over the hour. He considered drinking from the tap because the metal taste of cheap water would be a proof of something like normal. He turned the handle and let the first rush go so it could carry out whatever lay in the pipes. He cupped his hand and sniffed and thought about how he was too old to be sniffing anything. The water held the tastelessness that passes for clean when you have paid for it. He drank anyway and let the cold be a story his tongue could hold for a minute. When he looked into the sink, he saw no trace of fog at the edges of the mirror and felt a small foolish pride at how dry the glass stayed. He kept the television off because he did not want to be taught by other voices. He lay on top of the bedspread because he liked the feeling of separation. His clothes against the cover against the sheet, layer over layer, as if a man could place something between himself and the next thing. He closed his eyes and saw the other room, as you see a place you have been not long before. He saw the way the cover had held the valley of sleep. He pictured his own face on the other side, turned toward the window, mouth a little open, the look of a man who has made small peace with being alone in a city. He opened his eyes and watched the room try to hold him. He slept and woke into a quiet that felt borrowed. The room had the smell rooms carry sometime in the first grief of morning, used air and hopeful detergent, and the faint animal note human skin leaves on anything it has loved. He showered with the hotel soap that burns the nose when you hold it too near. And when he turned off the water, the mirror did what all mirrors do in that moment and surrendered to fog. He drew a line in the steam with one finger like a child called to proof and saw himself in the wobbly window that action provided. He wondered if the other mirror cleared at the same time. He tried to conjure the cough he had heard. He had not heard his own voice yet today. He was careful not to. He used the vent as a clock. He stood beneath it listening for the thrum. He knew meant the building was thinking about offering or withholding. The push of air came from his room into the other, the slats set to favor that order as if the hotel had been built to help the quiet pass along. He said nothing aloud. He stood there long enough that the hum became the only sound, and then the chair near the desk creaked as cooling wood moves. He thought of tracing the creak to its source, and then left it alone. Some things, left unnamed, stayed smaller. That day, he gave back the city to the city. He walked to the place the company said the day would take place, and sat at a table with paper and said his name and watched other men and women say their names and show their faces in their phones. He lifted a cup of coffee to his mouth and tasted the acid and the rest of the room's sigh when a projector came to life. He wrote notes that did not matter and turned a page only when he had to. When someone asked him a question, he answered, and he heard a little skip in his voice, a hitch like a man who has found his coat lighter than when he last wore it. No one looked at him as if he were a wrong piece in a box. They carry on. The building's cooling system clicked and whispered. Evening put its smell into the hallways as he left, the smell of paper and floor wax and the quiet boredom of a place that has seen too many earnest faces. Back in the room, he acted like a man who knows his room. He left the trailing shirt in his bag. He did not touch the closet where men hang loves they do not live. He took out his toothbrush and held it in his hand until he understood what game he was playing, and then he set it in the bag and zipped the bag and put the bag in the drawer and shut the drawer, and then pulled the drawer open and took the bag out and left it on the dresser. He made the chair face the window. He twisted the blinds so they showed him a different section of pipes on the white wall outside. He stood under the vent and listened the way you listen to a seashell when you are a child and want the sea to tell you what it thinks of you. At some hour that was somewhere between late and later, he heard the shower through the vent again, a steady, simple insistence that turned to silence in a way that made him jealous. He went into his bathroom and turned on the tap till steam began to make itself and stood and watched the mirror fog. He wiped a circle clean with the towel. He saw the red where the towel had scrubbed his cheek raw. He stood there with the towel in his hands and three thoughts in an order that was not rational. He would call someone, he would leave. He would put the towel exactly back, how he had found it that first day. Housekeeping came in the late morning when the small plastic sign on his knob did not stand between them and their schedule. He stepped aside and let a woman with good hands make the whole place right. She asked if he wanted fresh or if he was saving the planet this week, and he said he would save, though what that meant in a place like this, he could not say. She looked at the toothbrush on the dresser and told him there were spare kits at the desk if he needed, and he smiled like a man who understands the words and set the little knot of his tie and told himself to stop being a fool. Later, he found that his socks had been folded in a shape he would never have chosen. The shame he felt at the intimacy of that made him sit on the bed for a long time and stare at the television black and remember a field near his childhood home where a little place in the weeds had held the shape of his body for an afternoon. He wrote a note to himself. It said, "Do not go into the other room," and pinned it under his wallet on the desk. because a paper under a weight sometimes holds better in the mind. He read it twice. It looked childish, the way a kindergarten teacher might shape a lesson in meat and potatoes for minds not ready to be met halfway. He left the note where it lay and went about the business of not thinking. He counted how many slats the vent had and then corrected himself because the counting put a number in his head, and numbers make a promise. He lay on the bed and watched the ceiling light hum, and the shadow of the ceiling fan do a slow ellipse even as the fan stood still, a trick of the street lamp beyond the blind. That night he did not sleep. The city moved around him at the pace of a sleeping pet, stretching and resettling, and he moved with it, elbows in the sheet, shoulder against the headboard, hand on the phone held like a weight. Through the vent came a sound that could be a laugh if the world was unkind. He sat up straight. The sound came again, and this time he knew it, the low effort he made when he did not want to show his teeth and wanted the room to feel he was fine. He tipped his head under the vent and heard his voice say nothing and then breathe. He counted a breath he had taken in another room. The morning took whatever position it wanted. He opened the drawer and found the room service menu again on the late page, as if the hotel had been waiting to show him the thing it knew about him. Under it lay another receipt tied to his name. The items listed were not the ones from the first paper. They were perfect in a way that made him feel sick. He had dreamed of one of them during the night, not as food, but as a shape that fit the hunger he had had all day in his ribs. He had not ordered. The signature had been done by his hand and had the little loop he puts in his last initial when he is impatient. He stared until the ink in the paper and the table merged into one thing, and he had to stand and walk into the bathroom and find himself and say a word to the mirror to see if his mouth still remembered how it worked. He said a word no one would hear, and the word came out with the accent of a man from the place he had not gone back to in a long time. He went to the desk again and laid the paper in front of a woman who had not been there the night before and told her as plain as he could that he did not wish to be charged for a meal he had not had. She said, of course, and typed in a way that gave him more trust than he wanted to give, and she slid the paper back and told him she would mark the room as a no-sell for the next turnaround and reset his keys. She said it the way a nurse tells a patient there will be a little pinch. He had always hated the idea of resets. Nothing that gets reset becomes the same thing again. She offered him a different room higher up. He refused because he did not know if the air moved the same way up there, and he could not bear to learn a new vent. He thought of leaving the hotel altogether. He walked outside and let the late morning sit on his face soft and humid, and he stood across the street and looked at the building with its blank rows, its glass that could not reveal a soul, and realized he could not put anything else between himself, and this without making the rest of the week a trick. He went back in. The lobby was too cold. He breathed the cold and thought of an old walk-in at the diner where he used to work, the way you would stand in it a second longer than you had to because the world outside hurt. The last night the window refused to shut. Not physically, but in the mind where you hope the world closes and lets you feel kept. He lay in bed and stared at the slice of pipes lit by the hotel's own lighting, the smear of city glow that never quite dims. Through the vent came the shower sound again, patient and thorough, and in his own space, the mirror fogged even though he had not turned on the tap. He went into the bathroom and watched breath he had not made gather itself on glass, and he wiped around with his forearm and saw nothing where his face should be for a heartbeat that he did not measure. Then he saw himself and wished he had not. He left the bathroom and sat on the edge of the bed where the covers made a little ramp to the floor. He felt the give of the mattress where a body had worked its way into sleep and then out. He put his hands on his knees and listened to the vent. He thought of the other room like a neighbor who needs you to snap a picture of their porch when a package comes. He thought of how much of his life was spent near walls as thin as this. Rooms like this, air like this, the long forever of being a good guest. He held himself there and let the breath pass. He rose at last when he could not stand the thought of staying put, and put his palm to the wall under the vent. The paint felt thick and clean and made to be scrubbed. He pressed until the bones hurt, just enough to make him ashamed. He slipped his card into his pocket, found his shoes with his toes, and walked into the hall. The door across did not belong to him, and the hall knew it. He stood close to it as men do when they do not want to be seen on the cameras. He could hear the soft cough that declared someone alive inside. He held his own breath and matched the cough in his head. He lifted his hand because the body wants to touch the fact of itself. He let it fall. He used the service stair because his mind told him it was quieter. The stair smelled of detergent and long days and a mop that had missed certain corners. On the landing, a door to a maintenance room stood propped by a bucket, and in the gap he saw the back of the wall that separated the rooms. The fat cylinder of a duct, the damper with the arrow etched into it. The arrow pointed on its hinge toward the other room, the same as the grill. He knew the logic of negative and positive pressure, as a man knows anything he has had to respect. He stood there with his hand against the cool silver until the metal took away the warmth and reflected it back in the smallest possible way. He did not sleep the rest of that night. The room lay around him like a suit too small in the shoulders. He sat in the chair and held the television remote in one hand and did not use it. He watched the door, the crack of light at the floor, the vent, the shadow that moved across the ceiling when a car outside threw its bones into a turn. He heard the soft delivery knock down the hall and the murmur of thanks and the clink of fork against plate that followed. He could not tell if it came from his side or the other. He felt tired in the long way. He woke near dawn without intending to. His head dropped forward, the remote on the floor near his foot like a dead bird. The air had a clean edge, and in that clean edge, a sound came that might have been water turning off. He looked to the vent and saw a whisper of fog there, the smallest possible cloud teasing itself through slats. He stood and walked into the bathroom and saw his mirror clear at last, a perfect rectangle of nothing, and he stepped back because stepping forward would have made him a different man. He did not turn on the light. He waited for the room to ask him a question. He had always believed in leaving no trace, in returning a place to itself. He packed the suitcase with the shirts, folded how he liked, placed the toiletry bag in the top so he could reach it at the airport to throw the little bottles away, gathered the papers and straightened the top page so that the corner sat true. He walked the room with a rag of toilet paper in his hand, wiping his prints off glass he did not own, a habit learned so long ago he could not think of why it suited him. He took his note from under the wallet and read it once more. He folded it and put it in his pocket because even a foolish thing should not be left for strangers. On his way out, he paused and looked back the way you look back at a rented place, checking that your shape has not stayed in the corner. The bed stood squared. The chair waited. The vent was a small mouth that held its own counsel. He opened the door and then closed it again, and then opened it once more, because sometimes doing a thing twice helps. He went to the other door and raised his hand and did not knock. He slid the room service menu from the slot outside and flipped it to the late page and looked at the choices as if they could still change. He tucked it back. He carried his suitcase to the elevator and felt the wheels stutter over a join in the carpet. He watched the floor numbers glow, the tidy little promises, and kept his eyes on his feet to keep from thinking about promises. He crossed the lobby and thanked the man at the desk, even though the man had not looked up. He walked out into the morning, and the morning met him without interest. He went the long way around the block because he did not want the hotel to be the last thing his eyes held. On the flight home, he did not touch the folded note in his pocket. He kept his hands on the armrests and watched the aisle, the slow parade of cups and knees and shoes, and let the engines be the story. He landed where he started and drove the route he knew and unlocked his own door and entered the place that had to accept him. The mirror in his bathroom fogged because he put on the shower and left it there longer than he needed. He drew a line in it and held his breath until the line closed in a slow apology and his face was a shadow again. He slept in his own bed and woke into his own morning and tasted the same flat coffee he always made when he did not mean to go to the store on the way home. His toothbrush lay where he had left it by his sink, dry as a scold. He set it down and went to his dresser and found his spare kit, the travel one the company gave him last year, sealed in plastic, soap and brush and mint. He held it in his hand and felt how light it was. He set it in the top drawer and shut it because some things need to be kept where you cannot see them. He stood in his own hallway and heard water run through the building and felt the little toe bone of panic touch him and then leave. At work they asked him how the trip had gone, and he said fine. He said the meeting had done what it meant to do, and that the city had been kind to him, and that the hotel had been normal. He said these things in the tone of a man who believes the world is one piece and does not like to be made the fool. He filed his expense report without including the receipts that did not sit right in his head, and no one asked for them. He threw the papers into a drawer. He kept the room key in his wallet, because that is what you do when you want proof that life is ordinary. Weeks later, in another city, in a room that had tried to be a cousin of the last, with a vent on a different wall, and a mirror with a different ship at the corner, and a chair that wanted to be sat in, he found that the air moved toward him instead of away. He held his ear to the grill, and the sound he heard did not belong to him. He took his toothbrush and set it in a glass and walked into the hall and put his head against a door he had not paid for and heard a quiet cough he had never heard from strangers. He had the good sense to be ashamed of the recognition. He stepped back and made himself laugh without noise. He went inside and drew a line on the mirror to remind himself he was the one here now, and watched the line close, slow and sure, as if the glass had already made up its mind about him.